Welcome back to Face the Nation, and we are continuing our conversation with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is just back in the U.S. after signing a deal with the Taliban in Doha. And just that statement alone is kind of amazing. You are the first U.S. cabinet official to ever meet with a member of the Taliban. I think you actually met with one of the founding members of the Taliban who was involved.
I met with their senior negotiator yesterday, yes.
You called them terrorists in the past. Do you still consider the Taliban terrorists?
They have an enormous amount of American blood on their hands.
And apparently in a partnership still with al-Qaeda.
Nope, they said yesterday, signed a document, the gentleman I met with agreed that they would break that relationship and that they would work alongside of us to destroy, deny resources to, and have al-Qaeda depart from that place.
And you trust that?
Don't trust anything. We're going to deliver. It's about actions. The agreement set out the conditions, it set out the space, but no, this deal doesn't depend upon trusting anyone. It has a deep, complex, well thought out, multi-month negotiated verification complex and mechanism by which we can observe and hold every member of the agreement accountable. We'll do that. It's not about trust. It's about what happens on the ground, not only yesterday, which was an important day, but in the days that follow.
The U.S. pledged in this agreement, which is public, as you say, that it will help to get up to 5,000 Taliban prisoners released. The president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, says no way, no how. Nothing like that was agreed to. All this is supposed to happen in the next 10 days. Did the U.S. agree to help release 5,000 prisoners?
You saw what the document says. It says we will work with all relevant...
What he's saying is wrong?
It says that we will work with all relevant parties to build on confidence, to create confidence building measures amongst all of the parties, the Afghan government, non-Taliban, and others in the Afghan. We want this to be an inclusive process.
But
we want women to involve. There'll be lots of people say things. There'll be lots of noise. Everyone's competing for attention and time in the media. What matters is the actions that we take, the discussions that we had. We have come a long ways. And we have worked not only yesterday while I was in Doha, Secretary of Defense was in Kabul along with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. They made a declaration. There was a commitment from the Afghan government too. We've made a lot of progress. No one's under any illusion that this will be straightforward. We've built an important base where we can begin to bring American soldiers home, reduce the risk of the loss of life of any American in Afghanistan, and hopefully set the conditions so the Afghan people can build out a peaceful resolution to their, now what for them is a 40-year struggle.
Well, putting 5,000 or up to 5,000 fighters back on the field is would have a significant impact on any of the implementation, one would think. So,
there have been,
do you expect this to actually happen?
There have been prisoner releases from both sides before. We've managed to figure our path forward. We'll know who these people are. We are working to build out a set of confidence measures that will do for America what President Trump has committed. Reduce our cost in blood and treasure and keep America safe from terrorism. I don't think any American can doubt President Trump's seriousness in that.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican, and about 20 allies who you know wasn't very happy with you this week, though, because she released a public letter saying that there are problems with this, that you are pretending that the Taliban can be counterterrorism partners, and saying, you know, the Taliban's still allied with al-Qaeda, and pointing out you personally, when you were a member of Congress, she suggested, wouldn't accept a deal like this, that you raised concerns about secret side deals that the Obama administration had cut with Iran back then, so that any kind of annex. Yes. She says there are secret annexes to this deal.
I'm happy to talk with her. There are no annexes that the members of Congress won't have a chance to see.
Meaning there are classified details that will be shared with Congress?
The public document was released yesterday. There are 2 implementing elements that will be provided. They are secret. They are military implementation documents that are important to protect our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Every member of Congress will get a chance to see them. They're classified secret. There aren't any side deals. Remember, the side deals I was complaining about were deals that the American side never got to see. John Kerry never got to see those side deals. This is not that. This is a fully transparent arrangement. And
so there's no deal to keep a certain U.S. military presence in Afghanistan.
The document that was made public yesterday is the complete agreement. The implementing elements of that will be available for every member of Congress to see. Know this. I saw what Congresswoman Cheney said, and I have an enormous amount of respect for her. The American people should know Donald Trump is not going to take words on a paper. We're going to see if the Taliban are prepared to live up to the commitments they'd made. The Bush administration and the Obama administration both tried to get the words that were on the paper yesterday that the Taliban would break from al-Qaeda publicly. We got that. That's important. Now, time will tell if they'll live up to that commitment is our expectation. They have promised us they will do so, and we'll be able to see on the ground everything they do or choose not to do.
Well, it's a historic agreement.
Thank you
Secretary,
very much, Margaret.
thank you for coming on to talk about it. We'll be right back. That was businessman Tom Steyer doing a little pre-primary dance in South Carolina. He did come in third, but he had hoped to do better, and he dropped out of the race last night. The rest of the candidates have moved on to Super Tuesday, and that's this Tuesday, when 14 states will hold contests, among them California and Texas. We have some new CBS News Battleground Tracker numbers for both of them. Out in California, Senator Bernie Sanders is up with 31% support. Former Vice President Joe Biden and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren come in behind Sanders with 19% and 18% respectively. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has 12%, and the rest of the field comes in at under 10%. Looking to Texas, the race is tighter. Bernie Sanders is in the lead here with 30%, but Joe Biden close behind him with 26%, and Elizabeth Warren comes in at 17% support. Michael Bloomberg is at 13%, and the rest of the field comes in at 6% or less. Joining us once again is CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto, and we want to bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, this was a big and much-needed win for Joe Biden in South Carolina. What does this mean for him going into Tuesday?
Well, his team would tell you this is the momentum they need to convince any late deciding voter who is not a fan of Bernie Sanders to side with them instead. Our hope is that by the end of Tuesday, he emerges as the clear alternative to Sanders. It's pretty mathematically impossible, based on what polling is showing us right now, for somebody to surpass Sanders, especially because he's going to have such a big win, it looks like, in places like California. But they're hoping, the Biden team is, that in the next few days they're able to raise millions of dollars and, again, convince people that he is the leading alternative.
Anthony, does he have the enthusiasm that you say Sanders supporters?
Well, that remains a key difference between these candidates, which is that Bernie Sanders supporters are the most enthusiastic of all the top candidates. That's why his numbers remain so stable. Those folks turn out for him. But Joe Biden still has a challenge in that regard. His supporters are less enthusiastic about him. Can he motivate them to turn out, I think, remains a key question. And look, to that point, when you look at California, Texas, at these big delegate hauls, the Democrats give out delegates just the top finishers. And so they could very conceivably end up splitting the delegates along with some of these other candidates, and then we move on into the spring.
And there are a lot of delegates at stake here on Tuesday, 1,344. It's about 30% of what's needed for the nomination. So, Ed, how do the candidates sort of crack the threshold? Explain some of the math here.
So there's essentially two numbers to look at on Tuesday night. There's the perception number. Who wins the state? Who can say that they walked away winning the most states? But the more important number ultimately is the nomination number. Who gets closest to getting the 1,990 or 91 delegates you need to get over the threshold and win that nomination?
Because it's not winner take all.
It is not. You have to hit 15% in each congressional district and in the states. And so the numbers to look for are 15. So if you look at our California and Texas numbers right now, Mike Bloomberg's in trouble because he's not hitting 15%. This could have been a very expensive overuse of his money if he can't hit 15% in those two states. But this is why, despite not winning anything so far, Elizabeth Warren is still in this race, because she sees that she's doing well enough in California and in Texas and in a few of these other states likely that she can get above 15% and keep a pool of delegates that keeps her in the race going into later March and April.
And that Bloomberg number that you talk about is so critical, because if he does do just well enough to pick up delegates, if he picks up delegates in some regions of these states, even if he doesn't win them, then that changes the math for everybody else. Now he's a player, but if he falls just short of it, then all those delegates can go to other top candidates, to a Biden or to a Sanders, and that changes the math going forward for them.
And can $400 million in ad spending close that gap? That's a big gamble.
It could potentially. Look, and tonight he's doing something that hasn't been done in a while. He's buying 3 minutes of advertising on NBC and CBS to talk about the coronavirus and trying to cast himself as somebody who's a competent manager who could probably help solve this problem and would have tackled it sooner than the president. He can spend as much as he wants, but if he doesn't hit 15% in these states on Tuesday, it will have been for naught, essentially. Certainly they believe that they can go on into Florida and Arizona and Illinois next and try to compete in later March contests. But perhaps the biggest loser last night in South Carolina was Mike Bloomberg, because Joe Biden did so well. They needed Biden to stumble or to only win narrowly to help make the argument that he's the better moderate alternative.
It couldn't have felt good for Tom Steyer to have spent over $200 million, almost $300 million on spending.
It's a warning sign, because South Carolina was his petri dish. It was his test that if he could do it there, he could do it anywhere. He couldn't.
So Anthony and Ed, there are a lot of headlines after South Carolina saying this is now a two-person race, but there are still a lot of people on the field.
It remains a multi-candidate race. There's no question about it. And I think part of that is you look at Bernie Sanders and you look at, despite that enthusiasm that he has, can he grow it? Can he draw people to him? And when we ask folks, most of the people supporting Sanders say they've already liked him. They've liked him for a long time. But far fewer say they've taken a second or third look at him as he's won these early states. So can he translate any success he's had into momentum going forward and build on that 25, that 30% that he's already got? That, I think, remains a key question.
This will not be clean. This is going to be a messy contest. It's different than what we've seen before because we have so many candidates. We're down to 7, the magnificent 7, perhaps, who are going into Tuesday. Will the field shrink after Tuesday? Probably. But again, if you're somebody who can hit viability, 15% in a few of these states, you have no reason to get out yet.
It makes for some exciting political watching on Tuesday.
And very little sleep.
Yes.
Very little sleep.
A very long
anyone.
night with delegates coming as we go.
All right. Well, we'll gear up for that with both of you. Thank you. We'll be right back. For a closer look at how prepared we are for the coronavirus here in the U.S., we turn to former FDA Commissioner and physician Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
You served in the Trump administration. What do you think the administration is doing now that is right, wrong in its handling of the virus?
Right. Well, certainly expanding the diagnostic capability is the right move. We're going to have the capacity by the end of this week to diagnose probably 10,000 people a day or screen 10,000 people a day with the public health labs, 100 labs doing 100 tests a day. By the end of the week after that, we'll probably bring on another 10,000. So we'll have testing capacity of perhaps as much as 20,000 a day by the end of the next 2 weeks once we bring on the academic labs. That was really a critical step, bringing on those academic labs and leveraging their capacity. These are the major medical centers. What we need to do now is make a real concerted effort to get a therapeutic. We know when this started, but we don't know when this is going to end. And what's going to end it is our technology. Our savior here is going to be our technology. And we need to make a really robust effort to try to develop a therapeutic.
Meaning a treatment?
A treatment or a vaccine, but a therapeutic, a treatment is going to be more likely to be available in the fall. The vaccine's a much longer way off. And we always knew when that once-in-a-generation strain came along, and this might be that strain, that what we were going to have to depend on was our science and something to stop it, like a treatment or a vaccine. A treatment, again, we could have by September, October, potentially.
But more testing means more positive results? I mean, you're saying basically expect the number of those who've been diagnosed with the virus to also increase? It's
going to increase. Right now, there's probably hundreds or low thousands of cases.
Hundreds or low thousands of coronavirus cases in the U.S. that aren't reported?
That aren't reported yet. It's a big country, 340 million people, 330 million people. So anyone's individual risk is still very low. But we need to get those cases diagnosed and identified so we can start getting people quarantined and into treatment and prevent more spread. We need to start mitigating the implications of the spread. There was an analysis out today by Trevor Bradford, very good researcher out of the Hutch, looking at the genetic strains in Washington State. And by looking at the strains and the drift between the different strains for the people who have been diagnosed there, he's suggested that there's perhaps hundreds and maybe low thousands of cases. It's an interesting analysis. There probably are more cases. We have community spread now in Washington State, California, perhaps Illinois, Oregon. So certainly hundreds of cases.
So has the administration been slow in its response?
Well, look, I think the decision the administration made to block the travel, which was controversial at the time, clearly bought us time. It slowed the introduction of the virus into the country. The virus was probably here at that time, but it slowed additional cases. The question is, what did we do at that time? I think there are some things we did that were very smart. We got the country prepared. One of the mistakes, one of the challenges was getting the diagnostic testing in place. I think what we should have done, and I don't want to, armchair quarterback this, we relied on the CDC. We always rely on the CDC in a public health emergency, but simultaneous to that, we should have also been reaching out and trying to get the laboratory-developed tests into the game and the manufacturers who have diagnostic capability. We've done that. A couple of weeks went by, and they did that, and that is now in place, and those labs are going to be coming online. So we course-corrected. I think what it teaches us, if you're looking back, what is the teachable moment? It's don't take a linear approach to these crises. Take an all-of-the-above approach, and we need to do that now in a therapeutic. We can't put all our eggs in the vaccine basket. We need to be looking at antibody-based prophylaxis, treatments, vaccines, and all of the above approach. If case one doesn't work out, we have other options.
So you'd suggest that's the conversation the president should have tomorrow with the pharmaceutical companies?
Tomorrow is
When
the
he brings
vaccine
those
manufacturers. I think we need to look at the companies that can develop antibody-based prophylaxis as well. We did that against Ebola. That is actually what we could potentially have for the fall, or a small molecule drug that's currently on the shelf, trying to repurpose it for this.
The NIH director, Anthony Fauci, the doctor, said that from what he's seen, if you get infected, you likely won't get reinfected. But there seems to be so much we don't know. If someone has just sort of mild or moderate symptoms, how do they last? How do you know to go and get tested?
That's the challenge here. You don't. There isn't. The spectrum of disease here is very wide. A lot of people are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, but they shed virus and they're still infective. They can still transfer the virus, and a small percentage get very sick. And so it's probably the 80% that are mildly symptomatic or even asymptomatic that are the ones that are spreading it. The other thing is that people who get very sick don't get very sick right away. The time to hospitalization in different studies was 9 to 12 days. So they start off with cold-like symptoms, and then they progressively get more ill. And it's in that phase that people are spreading it. There was a very interesting analysis in the New England Journal of Medicine about 2 weeks ago that looked at viral load and viral shedding across the spectrum of disease. And the people who are mildly symptomatic shed as much virus as the people who are very sick. And that's atypical. Typically, the amount of virus you have and shed in some diseases comports with how much virus you have.
Okay. Doctor, thank you very much for coming on and
Thanks
giving us your analysis. We'll be back in a moment with a look at Super Tuesday and more. We're back with our panel. We brought in two of the big guns from the New York Times today. Edward Wong is a diplomatic correspondent, and Michael Crowley is a White House correspondent covering foreign policy. Good to have you both here.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks, Margaret.
I want to start on what we haven't mentioned thus far in the show, that the president has made a choice to run the intelligence community. He's going to renominate a Congressman, John Ratcliffe. Is he actually going to go through and get nominated and confirmed?
Well, that's a big question. President Trump was getting close to nominating Congressman Ratcliffe back in the summer and met so much resistance from senior Republicans in Congress who said this man is not qualified. He's only been on the Intelligence Committee for a year, may have inflated his resume, and is much more partisan than other people who have held that job. The president pulled back and didn't do it. And the question is now, has Ratcliffe changed any minds? There's not a lot of evidence of that, but there may be a little bit of a game going on here because the president has installed Richard Grenell, his ambassador to Germany, in that job in an acting basis. And because of complicated things that have to do with how long acting directors can serve, by nominating a new person, even if President Trump doesn't think Ratcliffe can get confirmed, that allows Rick Grenell to stay in that job for a longer amount of time. There's another theory that Rick Grenell is even more unpalatable to people in Congress than Ratcliffe, so Ratcliffe may be the more acceptable alternative. So there's a lot going on here, and people are trying to figure out what's real and what isn't.
Well, I bring that up first because it gets to some of what we have been talking about today in terms of confidence in professionals versus political choices made for political reasons, and confidence in hard fact and in intelligence. Ed, I know you've been following, as you always do, you lived in China for so long, and you followed the origins of this outbreak of corona. When you heard the administration this week change its language so many times in describing and characterizing response, What did you make of that? And what do you make of what is actually known in terms of what China is sharing with the U.S.?
Well, I think that everyone would agree that full transparency or a large amount of transparency on this virus is necessary, both, to push forward with expertise on addressing the virus, plus calming public fears over it. And I think when an administration or government appears to be non-transparent on it, then that creates problems. I think that the Trump administration really grappled with that this past week when you saw President Trump come out and say it was a new hoax by the Democrats, or when
and his chief of staff went out and said the media is covering this because they think it's going to take down the president.
Right. And I think that they're trying to adjust the language now from what I can tell, but I think that there's valid criticism of that. And I think if you compare that to the way Beijing reacted, there are some parallels in that Communist Party officials, Chinese officials really covered up the start of the virus. And there's a lot of information coming out these days that perhaps it started earlier and that they kept the public from learning about it. We know that one of the key whistleblowers, Dr. Li, tried to warn healthcare professionals in a private chat group about it, and then he was even taken in by the police because of that and admonished.
Michael, I mean, does the president now have the credibility and the trust of the public at a moment of crisis when you need it most?
No, that's a huge problem here, Margaret. And think back to what happened when Hurricane Dorian was hitting the United States last summer. President Trump made an inaccurate comment about the hurricane's path and was criticized for it. And then a day or two later, he's holding up a map showing the storm's forecasted path in the Oval Office, and it appears to have been doctored with just the kind of Sharpie pen that President Trump loves to use to sign documents. It really looks like they were altering information they were giving the public to make the president look good, to cover up for a mistake he had made. And President Trump has repeatedly bungled basic facts, including numbers of victims in the country. Yesterday, got the gender wrong of the person who died in Washington, although he may have been briefed inaccurately. I will say, Margaret, that I do think that that briefing yesterday was a step in the right direction. Having all those health experts there, particularly Dr. Fauci, there were questions about whether he was being muzzled. He said he was not, one of the nation's foremost authorities on these things. And I think President Trump understands he wants the markets to bounce back. The markets want to see that kind of expertise and expertise and credibility. And at least yesterday there was a step in that direction.
Well, we will see when markets open tomorrow what they thought of it, but certainly for the public, we'll continue to follow the details of this as we have on Face the Nation. Thank you all today for watching, and each week as you do. We'll see you Tuesday night for CBS News' special coverage of the Super Tuesday results. We go on the air here on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific, and our CBSN coverage starts at 5 p.m. as well. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.